What is inclusive leadership, and how can I foster a diverse work environment? This is a question we're going to dive in today's episode. My name is Z, and we're joined with not only Rich, but Sarah Penza with us today. Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Awesome. Rich?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm excited that we have Sarah today.
Yes. So this is our second episode. We had a special episode where we interviewed 3 leaders at Mastery. We're actually still at Mastery. So we're recording this episode 7 now with Sarah today. So this is a record for us. We actually have guests back to back.
I know. It's amazing. And we've learned so much from all of our guests that we've had on this special edition. And now, Sarah, I'm excited. Also, note, this is the season finale, so be sure to tune in until the entire episode is finished.
We're going to give you some, again, advice. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow us, to get updates on future episodes, because I have a feeling the folks that are listening to us, because we have actually a pretty good following right now. Thank you to all our subscribers and our listeners, that they're going to want more content sooner than later. So just keep an eye out for that. But today's topic is around inclusive leadership and how us as leaders, no matter what organization you work for, no matter what your title is, how much of an impact you can make in your organization and around, and with people around you as well. But with that, Sarah, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Insight.
Oh, gosh. Well, I've been a teammate at Insight for 7 years. I started in the sales enablement part of the organization, and I moved into instructional design, and then I moved into leadership development, and then diversity and inclusion. So really, my day in, day out is diversity and inclusion for United States, Canada, and also the European countries.
And of course, she didn't even talk about she's joined Insights from the beginning, and we knew each other from day one.
That's right.
So, I mean, the fun part, again, Sarah, and I love about Sarah, every time we introduce each other, she's like, and actually Z was a big vital part of why I'm here at Insight. I'm like, yes, you're welcome, everybody. So speaking of that, you've had experience in various different organizations and different roles. Mm-hmm. You're now our senior manager here for diversity, leadership, and inclusion. How did this journey even start? Like, how did you even go this path? Because you had various different roles before you joined Insight.
Yeah. People ask me this question a lot, and I've realized that the path to diversity inclusion role is different for everyone. But really, it started when I was a manager. When I was a manager and I had a team, and I realized that my team was full of people from different parts of the world. I was working in a Montreal cafe at that time, and Montreal is a very international city. And just the understanding or the adapting that was necessary, depending on what someone was going through, right? We had students, we had people that were full-time, we had young people, we had people who were part of an older generation, right? And so I would say it's really there that I didn't know the term inclusive leadership at that time, but it was there that I really bit off, what it means to actually bring a group of people together and get them aligned on one goal. So I've been lucky throughout my career to always touch that part. I was in management, and then I moved into leadership development. And leadership development is all about pulling the best out of your people, right? And making sure that they're in a working environment where they can contribute at their best. So, of course, moving into diversity inclusion was, for me, a very logical, though not expected, next step. Yeah. But, when the opportunity came around, I realized that, this is something that I think I can have an impact on. It's a little bit scary sometimes, but it is so rewarding when you speak to people, especially in this organization, who have been impacted by the programs that we put into place, and also the competence of their leaders.
Wow. Yeah. And I think a lot of us can relate to Sarah, right? That our lives takes us so many different directions. Sometimes we don't even know where we're going to end up. Some of us might have these amazing plans right out of college or right out of school. And then life happens. It takes us so many directions. And then I love what you just said, though. It's like when that opportunity presents itself, it could be scary because maybe you haven't done it before, or maybe it's, it's something that it means a lot. You want to do it right. I mean, there's so many factors there. And that's the first question that we're going to ask, right? Because a lot of our leaders that are joining us are in a role of leadership, right, of influencing others. But they're seeing that, hey, I want to make an impact, or I want to make more of an inclusive, a diversity inclusive environment for my organization or my team. So that's the first question. What are things that leaders can start doing to help foster that?
The diverse and the inclusive environment. Yeah, let's separate those out. First of all, right? There's diversity, and then there's inclusion, and then we can even go into equity and belonging, but I don't know if we have all the time for that. When it comes to diversity, I'm sure you've noticed, as well as many people probably in this podcast, that demographics are changing inside organizations, and we are starting to see a lot of new, smart, intelligent people who are from non-traditional parts of this world, or just a non-traditional, just not the same as it used to be, right? So diversity is coming. Diversity is happening, whether or not you like it, right? But when it comes to the inclusion, that's the part that's a little bit trickier, right? So, there was a study that was done, it was McKinsey, Inclusion Matters, that found that 52% of people in that survey rated their organization positively in terms of diversity, right? They were starting to see and feel it, right?
Yeah.
It would be nice to have more, but it's 52%, right? 29% of them rated their organizations positive for inclusion. And so why is that, right? When it comes to diversity, we have all of these different policies and these practices that we now engage in, right? We are recruiting in different places. We are seeing talent and bringing it in from, all over, right?
Yeah.
Even just the demographic changes in our society are helping that out. So we have all these new practices, these new policies, and that's great for diversity, but inclusion can't be policied, right? There's no policy that's going to make a leader more inclusive, right? So, when it comes to what a leader has influence over, yes, they have influence over diversity for sure, but I would say they definitely have influence over the way that those teammates are included in the team.
Yeah.
Right? So in terms of inclusion, there's a few things that leaders can be doing.
It's funny. I don't know where I heard this. I think, again, when you have interactions with so many people, you just hear different perspectives and thoughts. And I know we're at Mastery right now, and it's a great opportunity, right, to have those discussions, to see where teammates are at, where leaders are at, and they're just their thought process and the things that they're going through. And in those conversations, I heard one amazing analogy, and let me know your thoughts on this, because as soon as I heard it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to tell Sarah about this.
Okay.
Diversity isn't being invited to the party, but inclusion is inviting them to dance. What do you think? When I saw that, I just want to get your perspective. When I saw it, I was like, oh.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it, and a way that's accessible that everyone can understand, right? Because everyone has been to that party where they just stood around.
The wild child, yeah.
And they weren't invited to dance. They weren't invited to participate. They were there, right? Yeah. So that's absolutely what we're talking about with inclusion. Who's dancing on your team? Who's being invited to dance on your team?
And let's even take it a step further, right? I mean, school dances are awkward as they are already, especially in your elementary and high school years. But even being asked, even when you're asked to dance, you're still hesitant.
That's right.
You're like, am I going to make a fool of myself? Like, I don't know how to dance. Right? All these things come to mind, and I feel it's a lot of similarities as well, because maybe you've never been asked before. So it's like, what do I do? Can I even let loose? Or am I going to be just kind of going through the protocol? Or am I just going to, I love that, and also that term, dance like nobody's watching, right? Like, be yourself.
Exactly.
Because I don't know how many parties you've been a part of when everybody's included and everybody's dancing and being this. I had the best time instead of just a few that are, or the ones that are expert dancers and making us look silly, right? It's like, I think that's the world I want to live in. So when I saw that, I was like, I got to share that with Sarah.
I never thought about it that way, but that is a very nice picture that you are drawing right there. And I would also even add the person who's asking that person to dance, right?
Yes.
We're always a little
The
bit
popular
scared to moving
person.
up there. How do we ask that person to
Yeah.
dance? Yeah, that works really well if you consider inclusion, because, sometimes as a leader, we know that something is off, but we don't quite know exactly how to approach it.
Yeah, and like when you talk about, a lot of times we think you talk about policy and stuff that are within the scope of the organization. But as a leader, you have so much you can do, right? I think we talked about this before we before the show, is that we don't realize how much influence we have as leaders, that we can make such a big impact. It's just control what you can control. So what other advice would you have for those leaders that still are hesitant and be like, yeah, but I'm only one leader out of thousands or hundreds in my organization. How am I truly going to make an impact? Is there any advice you want to give them?
Yeah, and I would say the first thing is you can't be hesitant, which I know is terrible to say.
Go
and
dance.
hard to say, but you've got to, right? So, when we speak about inclusive leadership and we think of that sphere of influence, it is your team. And if somebody is on your team, it is absolutely imperative that you do the necessary work to make sure that they are included on that team, or else, they're just not contributing at the highest level that they can. So there's a couple of things that leaders can do. And I would say the first thing is good old get to know that person. You should really understand, so Franklin Covey, has again done some amazing research for many different topics, but they did some research on this, and they found that the most inclusive leaders were able to answer 3 questions about their people. The first question is, what are they most excited about? The second one is, what are they most worried about? And the third one was, where do they see themselves in 3 years? So inclusive leaders knew that about their people, and they knew it accurately about their people as well. Accurately meaning that it wasn't just their assumptions. They had actually spoken to their person, right? So, it is important as leaders that we get to know the people who we're leading, right? And I know some people think, we all know that we've all felt that one teammate or that one that we're like, oh, I am not meshing with this person, right? And that's understandable. A lot of times we respect what people want in terms of their privacy. So if we approach someone, for instance, at a dance, and they say they don't want to dance with us, right?
Yeah.
We respect that, and we back off, right? We can't do that as leaders. If they're on your team, we need to find a way to dance with them, right?
Yeah.
So spending the time with your teammate, asking questions, maybe not those 3 direct questions, because that might be a little crazy. If you ask your person those 3 questions, they might get a little bit scared, right?
Yeah.
Taken back because but there are other questions you can ask them in terms of, what are they finding the most difficult in their job right now? What are they liking the most about their job? Lots of different questions to really understand those 3 aspects.
Yeah. So something that just kind of popped in my head. So we kind of heard the benefits in our last episode of, that diversity piece, but I definitely want to hear more about your opinions on this as well. But what is it that can really strengthen, or what are the benefits of having the diversity and inclusivity on your team? Like how do you leverage both, right? And from your perspective.
Yeah, it's all around. It is perspective. It is absolutely perspective and the experiences that people who are different bring to your group. And when I say different, when we speak about diversity and inclusion, we're often stuck in gender and ethnicity, but there is so much more going on, right? There's socioeconomic status. I mean, there's disability, of course, veteran status. These are the main ones that we track. But floating under there is also is neurodivergence. You can't usually see that. Religion is floating there. Age. There's some studies that show that age is actually the most rampant form of discrimination in the world, right? But all this to say is when you meet someone, you see their ethnicity and their gender first, but there is so much floating under the water there in terms of diversity. So the first thing is just being open to people who think differently than you do, right? When we talk about inclusion, it is pulling that out, bringing that out into your team discussions, valuing what everyone has to say, understanding that at the end you all have to align on a common goal, right? And so there are ways to do this. There are ways we had already spoken about connecting with your teammates, right? There's also ways to make sure that even your team culture is an inclusive culture. And it has to be very intentional too. A lot of times we think that, okay, we can sit back and then our teammates are going to just find this beautiful way of working together, right?
Sure.
And that is absolutely not true. Every team has its norms, right? And the norms of today will change depending on who's leaving that team and who is joining that team. And so what inclusive leaders do is they're very intentional about setting those norms, about getting their team together and say, hey, let's talk about these norms. Maybe not in those words, but let's talk about these norms. Let's talk about if this happens, what are we going to do as a team? And let's commit to that, right? Yeah. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add that, and inevitably someone will break the norm, and that's fine. So an inclusive leader as well follows up immediately and makes sure that norm is adhered to.
I really like that. Another question that kind of stems from that, or just my thought process behind it, was I bet it probably makes teams gel and click more, though, once you pull out that inclusion and get everybody to the party and start inviting everybody to dance.
Oh, yeah. And you'll find a mutual respect. And that's really what you're going for. Because remember, not everyone is always going to like everybody. Not all of your teammates are going to like you. Want to go out to a beer with you, right? And you're not going to want to go out to a beer with all of your teammates as well, necessarily. But you can all have a healthy respect for each other. Yeah.
And a lot of times it's interesting when we hear, we do a lot of trainings around confidence and presentations. And some people, even in sales, right? It's like, hey, when you're talking to a client, talk like you're talking to a family member. The first thing that goes in my mind is not all family members get along. Yeah. So maybe that's not, it's like, it's different for everybody, but it's like, hey, respect, right? You have that level of respect because it's different for everybody, right? And I love that example because we always think family, and same thing, teams, they should get along, they work together. Leaders, and it says going back to our previous episodes we talked about, as a leader, we have a responsibility. And part of that responsibility is also being an inclusive leader. And I think that's one that, maybe isn't highly talked about as much, but I think it's more relevant than ever and needs to be talked about even more and put it to the front because that is something that we just can't lose sight of. One thing you said, Sarah, that really stands out to me is, we do trainings around difficult conversation, fierce conversations. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that clicked for me is like, hey, we have to address those elephants in the room, right? Yeah. The things that nobody speaks about, a leader, that's our responsibility is to bring it to the table and talk it out. And if you are an inclusive leader, everybody's going to invite to the party and dance to talk and share those things. But that's how you know, right? You won't know. If nobody's saying anything, everything's fine. Everything's good. I'm fine. Is it?
And may I add something? Yeah. And they're not all going to agree.
Yeah, and that's okay, though.
And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. The important thing is at the end, we do arrive at a resolution. Usually people just want to be understood.
Yeah.
Usually people are okay if you don't agree with them. But if you leave them with feeling that you listened to them and you understood them and you took their input as valuable, then you're on the way to figuring out, okay, how are we going to move forward on any particular situation or decision?
Yeah, and again, we can spend, oh my gosh, this episode should have been even long. Time flies. We're having this great discussions. Before we start to wrap up, I know you give us a lot of great strategies. One of the things that leaders and organizations look at is measurement, right? How do we measure this? How do we know, first of all, in a positive way, saying, hey, how do we know we're making an impact? How do you know that we're making a difference, that we're seeing a change? Is there any suggestion strategies that you have around that can benefit some of our leaders and organizations?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there's a whole subset that's related to data and what data to collect and what data to look at, and, goals and that evil word of quota, which, you never really want to. Quotas are not great things.
It's more cells.
Quotas are not great things. Yeah. But I would say when we're speaking about inclusive leadership, the real measurement is your team and their engagement. So I know that there are organizations absolutely do engagement surveys. That is true. But what I would do is, how often are you speaking with your people? What are you speaking about? Right? And again, can you answer those 3 questions? That for me is a more important measurement of a team than any number in terms of, who identifies as this, who identifies as this, who identifies as this, right? And when I bring someone into the team, right, am I understanding what is happening to my cultural norms and maybe adjusting my cultural norms, right? Because you might be starting with a group of men who do have diversity in the way that they're thinking, but they're all men, right? And then a woman joins your group, and she is also a caretaker of kids and a parent as well. And all of a sudden that dynamic changes 100%. It changes quite a bit, quite right? And just imagine all the differences that can pop up on a team. So if I was a leader, I would be mostly concerned with the engagement of every teammate that is on my team, and whether or not I'm understanding these aspects of them. And also whether or not I'm understanding how their diverse dimension might be popping up for them. And we didn't speak a lot about that, but how much this is popping up for them in their everyday as well. Because there are barriers to inclusion for people who find themselves in minority groups. And it's important that leaders and those teammates can have those frank discussions about it and figure out ways to work through them. So is that.
Wow. Well. Oh my gosh. Again, this is going to be like this is 1.0. We're going to have follow-up interviews here with Sarah on this, and even various different, we have amazing leaders at Insight that are leading the way as well, that are demonstrating not only their full-time job and what they do and their expertise, but they're so involved. It's impressive. Sarah, I know we can have a whole session on the stories of the impact and the things that we've seen from leaders and teammates in our different efforts and when they're in the dance. But Rich, what were some of the highlights of today's episode? Yeah,
just being conscious of those, socioeconomic, there's many different aspects of diversity, right? So that's something else that, we probably don't really take into consideration. We just think ethnicity most of the time, that's what people think of. But there's different levels, different aspects. So that's something to definitely be conscious of and bring to the table. And then also, fostering that inclusivity, right? You definitely want to make sure everybody feels like a part of the team rather than just like singling out one or two, or just having this group that dances and then other groups like just sitting off on the sidelines, right? So
yeah, no, those are amazing highlights. Sarah, any final thoughts as we wrap up? Any final suggestions, tips as we come up with the end this episode today?
My biggest tip for any leader is to be intentional about all of this. And to not just let it go, not just think things are going to work out, but really be intentional about understanding your teammates and also understanding your team culture and building that team culture, and include your team in building that culture.
Well said.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. You've definitely brought many different perspectives into the discussion of just diversity and inclusivity that I never even, it never even crossed my mind. I try to make everybody on my team feel included, regardless of what that looks like diversity-wise. But, you've opened the eyes for many today, so we really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today on our season finale. Please be sure to turn on your alerts and catch us on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube so you can catch us in season 2.